The restaurant always looked calm from the outside. Soft yellow lights glowed through tall glass windows, and slow music drifted gently into the street. People walking past often slowed their steps, taking a quick look inside. From there, it seemed like a place where important talks happened, where quiet laughter filled the air, and where only people with money and confidence belonged. Inside, everything moved by rules. No one ever spoke out loud. Voices stayed low, even when people laughed. Smiles were polite, measured, and careful. Guests sat straight in their chairs as if posture itself mattered here. Everyone seemed to understand how they were supposed to act, what tone to use, and most importantly, where they belonged. The waitress had learned those rules the hard way. She had worked there for years, long enough to stop counting the days. She remembered her first shift clearly, how nervous she was, how her hands shook as she carried plates, how she worried about every step she took. Over time she learned which tables liked extra napkins, which guests wanted their water filled before they even asked, and which ones never looked up from their phones when she spoke. She learned to walk lightly, almost silently. She learned to speak softly, never too loud, never too confident. She learned how to smile in a way that was warm but not noticeable. Most of all, she learned how not to take up space. That was how she survived each shift. Most people did not know her name. They did not ask. To them, she was simply part of the room, like the chairs, the curtains, or the soft music playing in the background. She blended in so well that sometimes it felt like she could disappear, and no one would notice. She did her job well. She always did. But being unseen still hurt in quiet ways she never talked about. It was the kind of pain that didn't show on the outside but stayed heavy in the chest. What no one knew was that music lived inside. It had been there since she was young, growing quietly as life around her became louder and harder. When she was a child, she used to sit near an old piano that didn't belong to her. It was kept in a place where dust gathered easily. Some of the keys were chipped. Some didn't work at all. The sound was far from perfect, but when she touched it, the world felt softer. When she played, time slowed down. The noise around her faded. For those moments, she didn't feel small or unimportant. She felt understood. Music became the one place where she could breathe freely. As she grew older, life began to move faster. Dreams were pushed aside by rent, bills, and early mornings. There was always something more important than music. She worked wherever she could, wherever someone would give her a shift. The piano slowly became something she only visited late at night in her thoughts, when the world was quiet and no one needed anything from her. Still, she never stopped listening. She never stopped feeling music in her chest. Even when she was exhausted, even when her hands were sore from carrying trays all day. That night, the restaurant was full. A private event was taking place, the kind where every detail mattered. Guests arrived, dressed carefully, checking their reflections as they walked in. They spoke as if they were always being watched. Laughter came easily, but it stayed controlled. Judgments were made silently. Through quick looks and raised eyebrows, the room smelled of rich food and expensive perfume. Near the wall stood a large piano. It was polished until it shined under the lights, every surface smooth and perfect. It looked more like a decoration than an instrument, placed there to add beauty to the room. Not sound. The waitress noticed it the moment she walked in. She always did. No matter how busy she was, no matter how tired she felt, her eyes found the piano. It felt like a quiet friend waiting patiently, never demanding attention, never complaining. Every time she passed it, her fingers tingled, but she never stopped. She never slowed down. She never allowed herself to look at it for too long. That piano was not meant for her. She knew that. As the evening went on, her feet began to ache. The floor felt harder with every step. She balanced heavy plates, remembered long orders, and smiled even when no one smiled back. One guest snapped fingers at her to get her attention. Another spoke to her without looking at her face. She nodded, apologized, and moved on, just like she always did. Inside, something felt heavier than usual. Between tables, she paused for just a second and looked at the piano again. The room buzzed with conversation, glasses clinking, forks scraping softly against plates. Yet the piano stood silent, untouched. It felt wrong somehow, like a voice being held back. She shook her head, forcing herself to look away and return to work later. During a brief quiet moment, she stood near a table where a few guests were talking loudly. They were discussing music, performances, and famous places they had visited. They spoke with confidence, tossing around words like they owned them. Their laughter came easily, their words floated carelessly through the air. One of them noticed her standing there with a tray. "You play?" The guest asked suddenly, with a half-smile that did not feel kind. She froze. "I'm sorry," she asked, unsure she heard correctly. "The piano," the guest said, nodding toward the corner. "You play?" A few others at the table turned to look at her. Some raised their eyebrows. Some smiled. A few laughed softly. Her heart began to race. She had learned long ago not to stand out, not to invite attention. Attention never led to anything good for her. She opened her mouth to say no, to step back into her safe place, but before she could speak, someone else at the table said, "Let her try." It sounded like a joke. Laughter followed. Not loud, not cruel, but sharp enough to sting. It was the kind of laughter that said expectations were low and judgment was already waiting. Heat rushed to her face. Her hands tightened around the tray so hard her fingers hurt. She could feel every eye on her, measuring her, deciding who she was without knowing anything about her. "I'm just here to work," she said quietly. "Oh, come on," someone replied. "One song." The room suddenly felt smaller. The lights felt brighter. Her heart pounded in her ears. She wanted to disappear. She could walk away. She knew that she could return to the kitchen, finish her shift, and go home like she always did. By tomorrow, no one would remember this moment. It would fade like so many others, but something inside her stirred. She thought of the nights she practiced alone. The songs she played only for herself, when no one could hear or judge. She thought of the part of her that had stayed quiet for so long because the world never asked to hear it. Her hands began to shake. The manager was nearby, busy with something else, not paying attention. No one was stopping this. No one was helping either. The guests waited. Some looked amused. Some looked curious. They were ready to be entertained or disappointed. She took a slow breath. "I don't usually play in front of people," she said softly. That only made them smile more. She nodded once, more to herself than to anyone else. Carefully, she placed the tray down. Each step toward the piano felt heavier than the last. Her legs moved forward, but her mind screamed at her to turn back. Whispers followed her. "Is she serious? This should be interesting. Does she even know how to play?" She did not look at them. The piano bench felt cold when she sat down. For a moment she did nothing. She just stared at the keys. They were clean and perfect, nothing like the old, worn pianos she knew so well. That scared her more than she expected. Her reflection stared back at her from the shiny surface. In her uniform, surrounded by people who believed she did not belong there, she looked smaller than ever. She placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes. In that brief silence, memories rushed in. Long shifts. Quiet disappointments. The feeling of being invisible day after day. And also the music always, the music waiting patiently for her to be brave. The room grew quiet, not out of respect, but curiosity. She opened her eyes. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She had never played this piano before. She did not know how it would sound. She did not know how the room would react. All she knew was that this moment mattered, not because of the crowd. Not because of their approval, but because, for the first time in a long while, she had chosen not to hide. She took one more breath, steady and deep, and slowly lowered her hands toward the keys. The first note was just about to be played. The first note was soft. So soft that some people almost missed it. It slipped into the room like a quiet breath, gentle and unsure, as if asking permission to stay. The sound was light, almost fragile. A few guests leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. Someone near the back kept talking, unaware that something small but important had already begun. Her fingers moved slowly at first. They were shaking. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears, loud and fast. The keys felt smooth and cool under her hands, nothing like the worn keys she remembered from years ago. This piano was perfect, and that scared her. For a brief moment, fear rose inside her chest, heavy and sharp. What if she failed? What if they laughed again? Her hands hesitated, just for a second, then she remembered something simple. She remembered the nights when she played alone, when no one was there to judge her. Nights when the music wasn't about being good enough. It wasn't about being seen. It was just about feeling something real after long, quiet days. She remembered how safe the music made her feel. Her shoulders relaxed a little. The next notes came out clearer. Still gentle, but steadier now. The sound traveled between the tables, slipping past glasses, plates, and quiet laughter. One conversation stopped. Then another. A fork paused in midair. Someone slowly set their glass down. The piano was no longer silent. She let her hands follow. A melody she had carried inside her for years. It wasn't fast. It wasn't flashy. It didn't try to impress anyone. It moved slowly, like a story told honestly. Without rushing, each note carried something she had never said out loud. Long mornings, when her body felt tired before the day even started. Evenings when she went home feeling invisible. Dreams she kept hidden because saying them out loud felt too risky. The room began to change. Guests shifted in their seats. The smiles meant for humor slowly faded. Faces that once held quiet judgment now showed focus. Even the people who had laughed earlier grew still, their expressions unreadable but serious. She didn't look at them. Her eyes stayed on the keys, watching her fingers move. Sometimes they closed completely. When they did, the restaurant faded away. The crowd disappeared. The whispers were gone. There was only her and the piano. The music grew stronger. Her fingers moved with more confidence now, flowing naturally from one note to the next. The melody lifted gently, then softened, then rose again. It wasn't perfect. One note slipped slightly off. Another sounded rough, but instead of breaking the moment, it made it more real. Someone near the front felt their throat tighten and didn't understand why. Another guest leaned back in their chair, arms no longer crossed. Breathing slowly as if the music had slowed them down, the piano spoke in away words. Never could. She thought of the child she once was. Sitting near a broken piano, dreaming without knowing how hard life could be. She thought of the years she chose safety over courage. The many times she stayed quiet because speaking up felt too dangerous. This song held all of that. It held her fear, her hope, her patience, and her quiet strength. Halfway through the song, the room was completely silent. No forks moved. No glasses touched the table. Even the staff nearby had stopped walking. They stood still, trays in hand, eyes drawn toward the sound. No one had asked them to stop. But no one wanted to miss a single note. The guests no longer saw a waitress in a simple uniform. They saw a person. They saw someone brave, enough to share something real. As the melody deepened, emotions surfaced in small, unexpected ways. One guest wiped at their eye quickly, pretending it was nothing. Another smiled softly, lost in a memory of a dream they once had but never followed. The music reminded them of things they had forgotten. For her, the fear was gone now. There was no crowd in her mind. No judgment. No pressure. There was only the song. Her hands moved freely, guided by memory and feeling instead of thought. The piano responded, filling the room with warmth. Each note landed gently but firmly, as if saying, "I am here. I matter." When the final part of the song arrived, it slowed. The notes stretched out, giving the room time to breathe. The melody softened, circling back to where it began, calm, honest, true. Her hands hovered above the keys. For a moment, then she pressed the final note. The sound lingered in the air. No one moved. The silence that followed was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was full, like the quiet after someone speaks a truth that cannot be ignored. Words felt too small for what had just happened. She kept her hands on the keys, afraid that moving would break the moment. Then, somewhere in the room, someone began to clap. Slowly. Carefully. One clap became two. Two became many. Within seconds, the sound filled the restaurant. Applause rose from every corner, growing louder and stronger. It wasn't polite or forced. It was real. She lifted her head for the first time. Faces looked back at her, but not with doubt or laughter. They showed surprise, respect, and something close to gratitude. A few people stood up without realizing they were doing it. Her chest tightened. She stood slowly, unsure of what to do with herself. The applause wrapped around her like warmth after a long, cold day. Her hands trembled again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was release. She gave a small bow, awkward and unsure, then stepped away from the piano. As she walked back, people moved aside to give her space. Some nodded. Some smiled. One guest leaned toward her and whispered, "Thank you." She couldn't answer. Her throat felt tight. When she returned to her station, the room slowly returned to motion. Conversations picked up again, but they were quieter now. More thoughtful. Laughter sounded different. She picked up her tray and went back to work. On the outside, nothing had changed. She still served tables. She still cleared plates. She still walked carefully through the room, but inside, everything was different. Her steps felt lighter. Her back felt straighter. Later that night, as the event came to an end, a few guests stopped her. They didn't ask her name. They didn't need to. They asked about the song. They asked if she played often. They listened when she spoke. That had never happened before. The manager finally noticed her then, asking what everyone was talking about. Others answered before she could, their voices full of excitement. The manager looked at her with surprise, then with something close to pride. "You should have said something," the manager said quietly. She didn't know how to reply. She had never believed her voice was worth mentioning. When her shift ended, she changed and stepped outside. Cool air brushed against her skin. City sounds returned, cars passing, distant voices. Life moving forward. She stood there for a moment, breathing it all in. Nothing magical happened next. No promises were made. No sudden doors opened. Life didn't change overnight, but something important had shifted. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. In the days that followed, the memory of that night stayed with her. Not as a perfect moment, but as a reminder. A reminder that her voice mattered, even when it shook. That her dreams were still alive, even if they had been quiet for years. She returned to work like always. But now, when she passed the piano, she didn't turn away so quickly. Sometimes, after closing, she was allowed to play for a few minutes. No crowd, no pressure. Just her and the keys, and that was enough. Life was still hard. She still worked long shifts. She still had tired mornings, but she had taken one step she could never take back, and deep inside, she knew something she had never known before. Courage doesn't need permission. It only needs one moment.